welcome to our channel. I am so incredibly happy to have you here. If you love hilarious stories you have just found, imagine you are an employee of a prominent organization. Your employer is an exceptionally wealthy tycoon in the country, a highly influential and widely celebrated billionaire. One day, he unexpectedly calls you in and appoints you to manage a newly acquired, extremely remote island located in the middle of a vast ocean where no civilized humans ever go. Because it is a remote assignment, you must travel there and live entirely. Viewing it as a grand life adventure, you accept the position and journey to the island. However, shortly after you begin your isolated life on this new island, your wealthy employer suddenly passes away. Because of the extreme isolation and the sudden disruption at the company, everyone forgets about the remote island, and there is no one left to contact you or check in on your status. Now, the choice is entirely yours. You have a pristine new island all to yourself, featuring a highly valuable, well-stocked plantation that can provide an abundant source of income and self-sustaining wealth, but you must live completely alone in the middle of the ocean. Would you choose to remain on the island, enjoying the ultimate solitude and managing this hidden paradise? Or would you say, enough is enough, and find a way to return to the civilized world? This person, who started from a single individual and grew into a small government. For the real-life William Marsters, this decision was not difficult. Having become accustomed to loneliness, he had fallen in love with the island. Accepting the unexpected blessing that had come his way, he separated himself from his relatives and began living on the small island. From that moment, an extraordinary story began, transforming the life of a single individual into what eventually became a small self-governing community. This is a remarkable true story that is almost impossible to believe. It is a completely different world where there is no paper money, no banks, and people still exchange goods through barter, just as their ancestors once did. There are no cars, no airplanes arrive, and there is no suitable place for helicopters to land. Politics, politicians, police officers, and judges are unknown here. There are no hospitals to treat the sick and no schools for children to attend. There is not even groundwater that can be drawn by digging a well when people need drinking water. Yet, on this island, which is far from ideal for human life, 29 people live together, and every one of them is the child of the same father. Their fate was shaped by being born to a father who chose to distance himself from the rest of the world, a decision that ultimately left his descendants isolated from modern civilization and government authority. Their home is Palmerston Island, located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It lies approximately 1,616 miles, 2,600 kilometers, from New Zealand and 2,796 miles, 4,500 kilometers, from Australia. Palmerston Island is located roughly 12,000 miles, 19,300 kilometers, from England. Palmerston is a coral atoll, a ring-shaped group of small islands formed by volcanic activity in the middle of the ocean. Unlike an ordinary island, a coral atoll surrounds a central lagoon filled with seawater. Palmerston Atoll consists of 6 small islands, but the 29 residents live on only one of them, while the other 5 islands are used for different purposes. The people survive through a supply ship that arrives only once every few months, carrying food and essential goods. This ship is the foundation of their lives and their only connection with the outside world. You may wonder how they pay for these supplies without using money. Although they do not have cash, they possess a valuable resource known as parrotfish. The men of the island catch these fish and export them on the same supply ship whenever it arrives. In return, they receive goods such as rice, flour, and sugar, which are divided equally among all the island's residents. If someone runs out of one of these supplies before the next shipment arrives, there is no store where they can buy more. Instead, they receive it from a neighbor. If the neighbor does not wish to give it away freely, they may ask for something they need in exchange. Since the island is surrounded entirely by the ocean, the residents do not obtain drinking water from underground sources but from the sky. Nature provides them with what seems like a miracle. Ocean water, which is too salty to drink, evaporates into the atmosphere, is naturally purified, and returns as fresh rainwater suitable for human consumption. The islanders have developed a special method of collecting every drop of this precious gift from nature. The roofs of their homes serve as their primary collection system. Whenever it rains, every drop that falls onto the roofs flows through pipes into large cement and plastic storage tanks built beside their homes. Because there are dry seasons when little or no rain falls, the stored water is carefully managed and used sparingly until the next rainfall arrives. Fortunately, their drinking water remains safe, but if they become ill, they have no hospital where they can receive medical treatment. In fact, the island does have a small clinic and a single nurse who can provide basic medical care and life-saving treatment. However, for major surgeries, childbirth, or emergency medical care, the residents must wait for the supply ship to arrive so they can travel abroad for treatment. Some of the island's residents are children, and there is a small school where they learn English and receive a basic education. The story of how these people left the rest of the world behind, crossed the ocean, and settled on such a remote island is truly remarkable. Before learning who they are, it is important to know about their ancestor, William Marsters. By profession, he was a carpenter, and by nationality, he was English. He worked for a wealthy Scottish businessman named John Brander, who owned trading ships that operated throughout the South Pacific Ocean. William's job was to travel with Brander's ships and repair them whenever they were damaged. Brander had leased several private islands in the Pacific Ocean from the British government. Among them was Palmerston Island, which was well known for its abundant coconut production. Brander collected the naturally growing coconuts on the island and produced coconut oil, which was highly valuable at the time, and sold it for profit. William Marsters first came to Palmerston Island as a carpenter aboard one of the ships that arrived to load coconuts. Then, in 1863, as he was preparing to leave, the Scottish businessman appointed him to manage the island. William Marsters was chosen for this position because of his exceptional practical skills. As a carpenter, he could sail and repair his own boat, cut trees, build houses, and perform almost every type of manual work on his own. After accepting the position, Marsters took his family and moved to the remote island about 160 years ago. Accompanying him were his Polynesian wife, Akutini, whom he had married in the Cook Islands, their son Joel, and Akutini's relative, Tauka, who helped care for their child. Each of these names is important because they play a key role in the story that follows. When he went to the island in 1863, he had only one wife. Later, however, in order to properly establish the island and ensure the continuation of future generations, additional wives became necessary. The matter was discussed and agreed upon with his wife. The relative of his wife, who had accompanied them to care for their child, had 2 daughters in her homeland. These 2 girls later became William Marsters' second and third wives, named Tangahiri and Madavaya. Over time, Marsters had children with his 3 wives, and for 14 years they lived on the island, receiving supplies and wages through ships that arrived every 6 months to load coconuts. Then, in 1877, an important change occurred. The owner of the island and the wealthy Scottish businessman John Brander passed away. Since his estate was vast, no one remembered the remote island or the worker who had been sent there alone. At that point, instead of leaving the island and returning to his homeland, Marsters changed his role from employee to owner. His first action was to divide the 6 islands equally among his 3 wives. He did this to prevent future disputes among his children over inheritance, especially in a place without formal administration, police, or judges. To ensure peace and resolve conflicts, he also established a council known as the Island Council, composed of representatives from his 3 family branches. Even today, when disputes arise, descendants from these 3 lineages gather in their ancestral council seats to resolve issues through discussion and forgiveness. In addition to maintaining internal harmony, the council also fairly distributes food brought by supply ships to the 3 family branches. Marsters also introduced strict rules for how the island should be governed. Although he was 17,500 kilometers away from his homeland of England, he never forgot his identity. He insisted that English be the only language spoken on the island and ordered that the British flag be raised and flown. When he went to the island in 1863, he had only one wife. Later, however, in order to properly establish the island and ensure the continuation of future generations, additional wives became necessary. The matter was discussed and agreed upon with his wife. the relative of his wife, who had accompanied them to care for their child, had 2 daughters in her homeland. These 2 girls later became William Marsters' second and third wives, named Tangahiri and Madhavaya. Over time, Marsters had children with his 3 wives, and for 14 years they lived on the island, receiving supplies and wages through ships that arrived every 6 months to load coconuts. Then, in 1877, an important change occurred. The owner of the island and the wealthy Scottish businessman John Brander passed away. Since his estate was vast, no one remembered the remote island or the worker who had been sent there alone. At that point, instead of leaving the island and returning to his homeland, Marsters changed his role from employee to owner. His first action was to divide the 6 islands equally among his 3 wives. He did this to prevent future disputes among his children over inheritance, especially in a place without formal administration, police, or judges. To ensure peace and resolve conflicts, he also established a council known as the Island Council, composed of representatives from his 3 family branches. Even today, when disputes arise, descendants from these 3 lineages gather in their ancestral council seats to resolve issues through discussion and forgiveness. In addition to maintaining internal harmony, the council also fairly distributes food brought by supply ships to the 3 family branches. Marsters also introduced strict rules for how the island should be governed. Although he was 17,500 kilometers away from his homeland of England, he never forgot his identity. He insisted that English be the only language spoken on the island and ordered that the British flag be raised and flown. As a result, the residents of Palmerston Island still speak English today, although their English sounds unusual to modern ears. They learned the language from their father, a native of Gloucestershire in southwest England, and because they never met other English speakers, their language did not evolve with the outside world. The children also developed a different form of English influenced by their mothers, who were Polynesian and spoke Maori. By blending Maori with English, they created a unique dialect known as Palmerston English. 14 years after Marsters began living on the island as its owner, in 1891, the British government declared that the lease granted to John Brander had expired and officially returned the island to government control. However, the residents were not removed. Instead, William Marsters was appointed as the British government's representative and the island's legal administrator. Known for his hard work and adventurous spirit, Marsters had 23 children on the island and lived to see 84 grandchildren. In 1899, at the age of 78, after spending 36 years on Palmerston Island, he passed away. After William Marsters passed away, the population of the island increased significantly, and the Island Council was required to establish new laws. The residents of this remote island, separated from the rest of the world, still wished to fall in love, marry, and have children. However, since they were all descendants of a single father, suitable marriage partners were not easily available within the community. In order to prevent moral and social complications, the Island Council gathered and introduced new regulations. Young people seeking marriage were encouraged, if possible, to travel to other islands to find partners, or to marry visitors arriving from outside the island. However, since outsiders rarely came to this remote island in the middle of the ocean, the young people were often required to travel abroad using the supply ship that arrived every 6 months in order to search for partners. Later, another challenge arose for the islanders. After their father's death, the British government expressed interest in selling the island to another company and began efforts to relocate the family from their land. However, the descendants of William Marsters firmly resisted, determined not to lose their father's inheritance. Eventually, they succeeded, and the British government legally transferred full ownership of Palmerston Island to the Marsters family. This agreement remains valid to this day, and the island is entirely private property belonging to the family. Anyone who wishes to visit must first seek permission from the family, and without approval, entry to the island is not allowed. However, this ownership also carries a strict condition. No matter what financial difficulties the family may face, they are not permitted to sell even a single portion of their land. Although Palmerston Island belongs to the Marsters family, it is also considered part of the Cook Islands. The Cook Islands is a group of islands that was once a British territory in the Pacific Ocean and later became a self-governing nation formed by 15 islands. It is somewhat both a country and not a fully independent country. While it has the legal right to establish relations with other nations, its population of fewer than 20,000 people is considered New Zealand citizens. Under a special agreement with New Zealand, its land, sea, and air boundaries are protected by the New Zealand Defence Force. As a result, the 29 residents of Palmerston Island, who are part of the Cook Islands, hold New Zealand citizenship and have the full right to live, work, and travel to New Zealand or Australia whenever they choose. This is also the reason why the population of Palmerston Island remains only 29 people. The total number of William Marsters' descendants has now grown to around 1,500, with the remaining family members living in New Zealand, Australia, Rarotonga, the capital of the Cook Islands, and other parts of the world. Many have left in search of jobs, marriage partners, and modern lifestyles, while others have gone for education and remained abroad. The New Zealand passports they hold allow them to live in any country they choose. Meanwhile, those who remain on the island continue to preserve their ancestral land, and medical supplies and educational materials for the small school are still delivered from New Zealand and Australia. In recent years, however, gradual changes have begun to appear on Palmerston Island, a place with a 160-year history. In 2022, Vodafone made mobile network access available on the island, bringing relief to residents who previously had to wait months for messages from the outside world and relied only on ship-delivered mail. Then in 2024, Elon Musk's Starlink began providing internet service, making Palmerston Island part of the modern digital world. Although the island has no traditional electricity grid, residents use solar panels to charge their phones and access both calls and the internet. However, phones and internet have not truly removed their isolation. They still depend on a cargo ship that arrives only once every 6 months for food and supplies. Medical care is also extremely limited, and serious illnesses cannot be treated on the island. Even though they now have the option to travel and live anywhere in the world, many residents continue to stay, choosing to preserve their ancestral land and live a life still deeply connected to their family heritage and isolation. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. If you enjoyed this video,